First, we're going to talk about how this overpayment problem began. Next, we'll talk about this lawsuit. After that, we'll talk about how the overpayment waivers work. And then we'll talk about what class members can expect next. And then we should have plenty of time for lots of question and answer. So please try and hold all your questions until the end of the presentation, or you can submit them via the chat as we go, and our panel will save them and address them at the end during the Q&A session. All right, Stephanie, do you want to take us through this part?
Yeah. And can other folks see the slides?
Proof. The Times just reported the proof, and it's based on the government's own accounting. This is why no one trusts the media. Finally, Trump hired a rocket scientist with an.
Yeah, I was just asking because I can't see the slides. So.
Oh yeah, looks like they're visible.
Yeah, the slides are there.
Okay, great. I'm sorry about that. All right, so sorry about that technical question. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of the lawsuit, we're just going to provide some background information to help everyone understand the issue better so that we all have kind of a shared understanding about what has been happening and what's going to happen. During the pandemic, the federal government created new types of unemployment benefits on top of the regular unemployment benefits that people can get during ordinary times, so that people who were facing job losses with a public health emergency, more people could get access to benefits, and the people who did get benefits could get more money and benefits than they typically would. And so this was federal programs that came down from the federal government and were paid for by the federal government, but they were administered by state agencies. And in New Mexico, the agency that was in charge of unemployment is the Department of Workforce Solutions. And also, like all of us, dealing with a lot of change at one time, the Department of Workforce Solutions was also trying to implement all these programs all in a short period of time. And unfortunately, many errors happened while the new programs were being rolled out, and that happened in other states as well as in New Mexico. But what it meant was that through no fault of their own, many people across New Mexico had major problems with their unemployment benefits. Tens of thousands of people were told that they had received too much in unemployment benefits and they had to pay the money back to Workforce Solutions. And Workforce Solutions is a collection agency when it's owed money. So there were several aggressive actions that the department took to recover overpayments from people who had received unemployment benefits. Some of this recovery was done because people who'd received unemployment benefits were told they owed the money back and they paid money back. Some people did that all in one chunk. Some people did that through getting on payment plans. Some people had liens put on their real estate, so their house had a lien put on it. The Department of Workforce Solutions also intercepted state tax refunds for some people. So you might have been expecting a tax refund and got less or none of it because the money went to the Department of Workforce Solutions instead. And then a lot of people were getting ongoing unemployment benefits. They still qualified, even though they had had some overpayment decision made. They still qualified for ongoing benefits. And so the department withheld some of those ongoing benefits to apply to pay back this old debt. And so through all these different methods, many people paid back some of their overpayment back to Workforce Solutions. But whether people were able technically to pay it back or not, people suffered a lot financially because of, either the consequences of the overpayment or the consequences of paying back the overpayment. So we've spoken with hundreds of people who lost their homes, their cars, their small businesses, people who took out loans or borrowed money from family members, people whose credit was impacted, and who had huge impacts to their financial security because of these collection practices.
So we filed the Duran lawsuit to end the confusion and then to get relief for thousands of affected New Mexicans and to negotiate a process to get these overpayments forgiven and to get refunds issued to anyone who made a payment or had these funds recouped. After a year of negotiating with the department, we entered a settlement that was approved last month at a hearing in Santa Fe. And so this is just briefly, this is a class action. If you're here, you're probably a member of the class. Thousands of other New Mexicans who aren't here are also part of the class. And what that means is that although only 5 people brought the lawsuit, they retained us to bring the case to benefit everyone who was affected in the same way. And so you all, if your class members, are our clients, and we represent you in this process to try to get your money back from the department, or to get your debt forgiven if you haven't paid the department any money. The named plaintiffs, the 5 that brought the lawsuit, are called class representatives, which means that they did the work in the case. They opened themselves up to the department's scrutiny. They shared the facts of their own stories to illustrate to the court what was happening to all of you and to everyone else in the class. And you'll notice that in the settlement agreement, they're being awarded some extra money to compensate them for their time, for helping our legal team develop the case, and for the risk that they took on in bringing the lawsuit. In a class, everyone benefits from the relief. Here, everyone who's a class member benefits from the settlement agreement. If you got a notice in the mail telling you about this settlement agreement, that means you're probably a class member. You don't have to bring your own lawsuit. That's already done for you in this class action. In some class actions, the relief is money, monetary compensation. So you might see commercials or ads about class action lawsuits saying that you can recover money due to a class action, or maybe you've received a small check in the mail from a class action lawsuit before. This lawsuit's a little bit different. The relief that we bargained for wasn't technically monetary compensation for people, although ultimately that's what is happening. But the relief that we requested was to get the department to change the way they handled these pandemic overpayments. And so as a result of that, thousands of class members are going to have these debts forgiven, and many people will get checks in the mail to reimburse them for amounts that they paid to the department, or for amounts that were taken from people's tax refunds, or otherwise recouped from other benefits. That all just depends on the specifics of your overpayment. All right, the settlement agreement has several features. These are the most important terms. First, the department has to stop all of their efforts to collect overpayments for a specific amount of time while they forgive overpayments. So this means that they shouldn't be intercepting tax refunds this year. They shouldn't be putting liens on property. They shouldn't be reducing people's unemployment benefits related to pandemic overpayments for the next 2 years while these waiver processes are ongoing. Second, the department's promised to grant blanket waivers to people in certain categories, and this process has already begun. We are going to talk in a lot more detail, for folks asking in the chat, I just want my money back, I want my overpayment forgiven. We're going to talk in a lot more detail in a minute here about these waivers. That's the process to get those refunds and to get debt forgiven. That's a key part of the settlement agreement. Third, in addition to blanket waivers, the department also agreed to create a process for individualized waivers, which we'll talk about in detail in a minute here. And then fourth, another important feature of the settlement agreement is that the department had to pass regulations governing these waivers and is now required to provide certain standardized notices about the blanket waiver and individualized waiver processes. And not only does the department have to forgive overpayments, they also have to refund any money that was taken for overpayments that are forgiven. So the only exception to this is amounts that were offset by the department. And I think you're muted.
Oh shoot, too many buttons. Thanks. So yeah, in this next section, we're going to get into the weeds a little bit about how the overpayment waivers work. So this information should help you understand all the different notices you've been getting from the Workforce Solutions, and it'll help you understand what's going to happen next. So there's 2 different types of waivers. There's the blanket waivers that we've talked about, and those are applied automatically to large groups of people. And then there's also individual waivers. So people can get more than one kind of waiver. You can get part of your overpayment forgiven through the blanket process, and then you still might need to apply for an individual waiver afterward. Once the overpayment is waived or forgiven, DWS also has to repay people any amount of money that has been applied to that debt. So if they reduced your benefits, if they intercepted your tax refund, or if you made payments on your overpayment, all that money will be going back to you. So if you've already received a check from DWS, that's what that check was for. The department has told us that as of February 7th, they've already sent over $32 million in refunds to class members, and they expect to send a lot more soon. So just to visualize what the process will look like, let's just walk through it together. If you have an overpayment and it's in a pandemic unemployment program that's eligible for a waiver, this is what the process will be like. First, DWS is going through the blanket waiver process right now. This is a process that DWS is using to try to forgive a lot of overpayments at the same time automatically. Many people will get a complete waiver through the blanket waiver process. This means that their whole overpayment will be forgiven automatically and they'll get a refund in the mail. And that's the end of the process for them. But some people won't. Some people won't be covered by the blanket waivers at all, or maybe only part of their overpayment will be forgiven automatically, and they'll still have an overpayment balance owed on their UI account. So for those folks, they will need to use the individualized waiver process. They'll submit a simple application to DWS, which we'll review in a minute, and the application will be either approved or denied. So to review, the blanket waiver process is completely automatic. There isn't an application process at all. And if you aren't covered by the blanket waiver process, you can take advantage of the individualized waiver process. And DWS will either approve or deny your application for an individual waiver. If you apply for an individualized waiver and it isn't approved by DWS, you have two options basically. If you don't get your whole overpayment waived through the individual waiver application, you can either appeal the denial or you can just pay your overpayment amount if there's still a balance. We're not going to get into the whole appeals process in this presentation, but it's important for you to know that you can appeal a denial of an individualized waiver application. So who qualifies for an individualized waiver? So there's two criteria that workers must be able to meet for an individualized waiver. The questions, there is a correct answer for each of these questions. They are, were you at fault for the overpayment? And the answer must be no. And would requiring you to repay the overpayment create a financial hardship for you or your family? And the answer to that question must be yes. So for question one, to qualify for the waiver, for the individualized waiver, your answer to this question, were you at fault, must be no. Any other answer will disqualify you from getting a waiver. So some people received overpayments because they committed fraud. They provided incorrect information on purpose, intentionally to get more money from the department. Those people who committed fraud are not included in this lawsuit. But for everybody else who did not commit fraud, there are a ton of reasons why you might have received an overpayment that wasn't your fault. And so here are some examples of reasons why you weren't at fault. For example, the overpayment was due to the department's error or mistake. Maybe your employer provided incorrect or untimely information. You provided all the information that was requested of you, but Workforce Solutions didn't use it, or maybe they used that information late. Maybe the information that you received from the department was conflicting, or it changed, or it was just confusing. And due to their confusing instructions, you provided incorrect information. That was pretty common. Maybe you had a question about your benefits and you tried to call Workforce Solutions directly and ask them about it, and you weren't able to get through. That was very common. We heard that the department received millions of phone calls at the beginning of the pandemic, and some people waited hours and hours or even days to get in touch with Workforce Solutions. So if your overpayment was related to the fact that you just couldn't even get anybody to talk to you, then you weren't at fault. So you could answer this question no. And also some people got confusing or conflicting information from Workforce Solutions and they didn't understand what they needed. That was also very common. So if your overpayment was related to that, then you were not at fault. In any one of these scenarios, if any of these answers sound like your situation, you can answer this question no. The second question for the individualized waiver is financial hardship. Would it be a hardship to you to repay this money? You have to answer this question yes. Any other response will disqualify you from getting a waiver. You can describe your specific circumstances if you want to, but here's some things that you can consider. Would repayment hurt you financially? This could be for people who, for example, would need to take out debt to pay this money back, or you'd have to choose between paying the department back or paying for your own necessities, or maybe just paying back this debt would wipe out all your savings. Any kind of negative financial impact should be considered here. Another situation could be you gave up something or you're in a worse financial position because you relied on receiving and keeping your benefits. You made certain choices, for example, based on the expectation that you were going to be getting UI and that you would be able to keep it. That could be considered a financial hardship, or just that requiring repayment would be unconscionable. For example, it would just be extremely unfair for you to have to repay it, or it would undermine your financial stability in some way. So how do you apply? There's going to be two different ways to apply. Soon, I don't think it's up quite yet, but soon there will be an option in your online unemployment insurance portal where you can submit the application form online. And we'll show you what that's going to look like here in a second. And the online application will be very simple. You just select yes or no to the two questions that we just discussed. You don't need to add any information. You don't need to supply any documentation. You can also apply for a waiver over the phone. So you can call the phone number that's on the screen right now, and that's DWS's customer service line for unemployment insurance. And you can call them and you can request a waiver over the phone. So here are some screenshots that we received from the department for what the online application should actually look like on a computer. It's still subject to change. It could end up looking a little different from this, but this is what they think it's going to look like at this point in time. So first, this is what the menu looks like on the side. You click, there will be an option in the drop-down menu that says Manage Debt. And then if you click that, it opens up another drop-down menu under that tab where you'll see an option called Request Overpayment Waiver. So you select that option to be taken to this screen here on the right. The overpayment waiver screen will show you the overpayments that are eligible for a waiver, including information like what program the benefits were under and the overpayment amount. On this screen, you'll click this button next to open the application form. This is what the application is going to look like, and I'm sorry, it's kind of small and blurry. This is just screenshots that we received. But in section 1, you'll see that there's the two eligibility questions that we discussed earlier. Remember, all you need to do is select the correct answer, yes or no, to both those questions. You just click those buttons, and that's enough information. Then below that, you see there's section 2. There's this optional box here where you can add more information or documentation with your waiver application. And then below that, you'll fill in your information and your contact information. And then don't forget to check this box at the bottom. That affirms that the information that you provided is true and correct to the best of your ability. So after you fill out those answers, you'll be able to submit your application and you'll be taken back to the home page where you can see the status of your applications. And that's it.
And for some people, because the Department of Workforce Solutions has been accepting applications for individual waivers for some time, they started doing it a few years ago. Some people have already gotten their overpayments forgiven, and so those folks might be wondering, what do I have to do, if anything, here, because I've already gotten my debt forgiven. But what those folks are going to get is, if they've already received a waiver, then their debt is forgiven, and that debt is gone already. But under the settlement agreement, the Department of Workforce Solutions has to go back and give refunds to those people who got full waivers already. And so those folks have already been determined to be eligible for forgiveness, have had the debt forgiven, but now the Department of Workforce Solutions is going to issue refunds for the money, if any, that the department already recovered. One issue that is impacting a lot of people who are covered by this lawsuit is that their claims are locked due to suspicious activity. And that doesn't mean that that the department thinks the person committed fraud. There's just something going on with their account that the department is worried about proceeding further and communicating with that person until they can clarify and make sure this is the person that they think it is. And so this affects a lot of people. Workforce Solutions has told us that about a quarter of class members have locked claims. So a lot of folks need to know to watch out for this and to try to address it. So one thing that will tell you that that's a situation for you is when you get the notices from the Department of Workforce Solutions about this lawsuit, Workforce Solutions is going to put a colored slip in with those notices so that people can be, alerted that there's some issue and tell y'all what to do about it if that happens to you. And maybe you've already tried to access your online account and have come up upon this. So you need to contact the Department of Workforce Solutions to unlock your account in order to be able to, access your account, apply for a waiver, and receive a refund. And what the department will ask for a lot of folks is that you'll have to go in person to one of their offices to present a photo ID, but they can tell you what the issue is and how to fix it. And so you can contact the Department of Workforce Solutions, and if you call in and you're on hold, listen for the options that they tell you about, what you can do next, because there's an option there to talk with an IT person. And so if you can select that option, then you can get connected with someone who's probably one of the best people to be able to help you through getting your claim unlocked. There are people who the Department of Workforce Solutions has said they have committed fraud. For those folks, they're not a part of the lawsuit, and so they don't have the right to get the debt forgiven or to get refunds. But remember, that's different from having a locked account. This is something very specific where the Department of Workforce Solutions decided and told you, we've decided that you committed fraud. So, a lot of folks, when they talk to Workforce Solutions about problems with their unemployment, they felt like Workforce Solutions was telling them they had lied, that they'd done something wrong, made them feel like they'd done something wrong. That isn't what this fraud finding is. A fraud finding is something more formal, like you got something in writing from the department saying that you had committed fraud. So, like I said, if the Department of Workforce Solutions has decided that you committed fraud, you're not eligible for the waivers, but you can appeal that decision from Workforce Solutions that you had committed fraud. And we're not going to get into the details of that right now because, that's outside of what this lawsuit is about, but it's important to know that fraud findings can be appealed, and you can try to find other resources to try to help you through that process. The other thing to keep in mind is that even if you do receive a waiver, you may still have an overpayment with the department where the department still says you owe them back some money. And just to explain why that might be, because it was very confusing for folks how much they got, how much they supposedly had been overpaid. But one key thing is that this lawsuit is only about those extra federal pandemic benefits that were on top or instead of regular state unemployment. So some people got the regular kind of state unemployment that they would have gotten at any other time, and then they also got these extra like $300 or $600 payments that were the extra federal pandemic benefits. Only the extra federal pandemic benefits can be forgiven if you had an overpayment of that type. So just keep in mind, like, apply for a waiver, apply for whatever the department tells you can apply for, but you may still end up with an overpayment that can't be forgiven because there's this piece for some folks that was regular state unemployment that can't be forgiven through this process. But, it'll certainly help, right, to have a lot of it taken off. So if you're not sure what benefits you got or which program your overpayment was in, you can get that information from the Department of Workforce Solutions. Also, starting in early March, the department is going to be sending out notices to people about how to apply for a waiver, and that notice will have the information in there about how much is eligible to be forgiven. And also, when you log into your online portal and try to apply for a waiver, that information will be presented there as well.
All right. I'm seeing lots of questions in the chat, and I feel kind of bad, but rest assured we'll get to that. If it doesn't come up in the slides, then we will address it in the Q&A. All right, what to expect next in the lawsuit. At this point, the biggest thing is to check your mail and your email and to visit your department portal online often. So the department right now is in the middle of the blanket waiver process that we described earlier. So they're handling these overpayments in big batches, like thousands of people at a time. And they're doing that behind the scenes without any application from you. So this process began in December, and it's probably going to continue through the end of this month. It may still be going. You may still be getting checks by mid-March. So just beware that that blanket waiver behind the scenes process is still happening, and it could still be happening as late as mid-March. If you haven't received a blanket waiver, a waiver automatically by that point, then the next thing that you should expect is notice about the individualized waiver process. So if you feel like you're still owed money by the department, they're claiming a debt, and that is not resolved automatically as part of this blanket waiver process, then you can expect to get a notice telling you about the individualized waiver process and telling you how to apply for an individualized waiver. The department is going to mail those instructions to everyone who didn't get their waiver completely forgiven through the blanket waiver process. But you don't have to wait. You know, if you want to just apply for that, you can do that. You'll just want to check. It's not available. You want to check your unemployment account online. And so my understanding is that this should be up by March 3rd at the latest. So this is the thing that we're getting most questions about. When will I get my refund? So many people are getting their checks at the same time that they get their blanket waiver notice. So what the settlement agreement says is that the department has to issue the check within a reasonable amount of time of waiving the overpayment. So you may get a notice telling you that you qualify for a waiver, and there may be a check that comes at the same time, or if not, it should be coming, reasonably soon after you get that overpayment notice. All right. So as more of these refund checks are getting out into the community, we're getting this question a lot about so-and-so got their check already, where's mine? And so our advice for folks who haven't gotten a refund check yet is that you should make sure that your mailing address is current. It could be possible that you were issued a refund, but it went to an old address and then was returned to sender. The department has said that this is a big problem because of the amount of time that's passed, and they've actually reported some of the data back to us. And there are many people who have checks that were sent to them that are bouncing back to the department. So, I can't stress enough the importance of going online and making sure that the address on your portal is the address that you would want somebody to send money to you. So definitely check your mailing address. That's the first thing that you should do. The next thing we recommend is to remember that the blanket waiver process isn't over yet, so it's still possible that you'll get this automatic forgiveness and a refund, but your account just hasn't been processed yet. The department expects to be done with this by the end of February, but it could take a few more weeks until you get the refund check, and that's completely normal and expected. But if that period of time passes and say it's mid-March, you haven't received any notices about blanket waivers, you haven't received your refund check, then you might just want to contact the department directly and ask. They should be able to tell you whether or not you got a blanket waiver, whether they're trying to find you to give you a check, or whether you have to apply for an individualized waiver separately. If you find out that your overpayment wasn't forgiven through the blanket waiver process, you should apply for an individualized waiver at that point. The department then is going to process that application and issue a refund if it's approved. And so they've told us that people are receiving their checks but are afraid to cash them. And so I've spoken with some people who have said the same thing, or people have called me and asked is this a scam? Is this a mistake? The department says people are calling them asking if this is a scam, asking if the checks are real. And some people are even bringing the checks into the department's offices to confirm that it's safe to accept the money. And so my advice there is that if you get a check from the department as a refund for a waived overpayment, you should cash it. It is a legitimate check, and that money is yours. One thing that's important to remember is that not everybody is going to get a refund check. It's not a court-ordered payout from the lawsuit. It's a refund of money that the department took to apply overpayments. And so some people never made any payments, or they had a debt, but they never had any funds recovered or recouped in any of these other ways that we've discussed. And so if the department's never actually like reduced your benefits or intercepted your tax refund or recovered any money from you, then you're not going to receive a refund. A waiver, you should still apply for a waiver to get the debt resolved, but you wouldn't get a check in that case because no money was actually taken from you. All right. In terms of info about the unemployment account, we have gotten a lot of inquiries from people asking about how much their refund's going to be, how much their overpayment was, when they can get the waiver, and so on. And unfortunately, we can't answer those kinds of questions because only the department has information about your individual unemployment account. We don't work for the department. We don't have access to those kinds of records. So your online portal is your best and most up-to-date way to get information about your account, including the waiver information. So you should be logging into that frequently. If you're locked out of the account, either because of the suspicious activity or because it's been a while since you logged in, then you can contact the department to get that access again. I'm told that you can select the technical support option on the in the automated system, and that should be one way to resolve that more easily. If you have to verify your identity in person, you can go to their offices, as mentioned earlier, and you can also go into their offices to get information about your account, including the waivers and the overpayments. If it's a matter of resetting an old or lost password, then technical support can help you with that. We have heard from the department and from class members that phones at DWS are very busy right now, which makes sense since almost 60,000 people received notice of the lawsuit. What they say is that Mondays, Tuesday mornings, and Fridays are the busiest for their unemployment department receiving phone calls. And so, and then also weeks that are shorter due to holiday office closures, those are probably bad times to call. What you might do is consider trying to call on a Wednesday or a Thursday, or trying to visit in person if you're having a hard time reaching someone over the phone, which I understand to be a problem. If you're having a lot of trouble, or if you're receiving concerning information, if you're disputing information you're getting back from the department, in some circumstances, we can help with those issues as class counsel. And so for those, you can call us and let us know about the issue, and we can see if there's a way that we can help. But just keep in mind that we're also receiving a lot of calls. So it might, you have to be patient. It might take us a little while to get back to you. The individualized waiver process, that application period is open for at least 2 years. So there is time to file the application for an individualized waiver. But just asking that you're patient if you're asking for our help. All right. Five important things to take away. I know that there's been a lot of information here, and so just in a nutshell, number one, please update your mailing address. Even if you think it's up to date, just double check and confirm. I'm telling you that lots of checks have been mailed to bad addresses, so you don't want to be in that group. Second, this process is underway right now. Blanket waiver process, the automatic waivers aren't done yet. And there are going to be lots more people who are getting automatic waivers soon. So waiting a few weeks for that process to resolve is a good idea. And then you can figure out whether your overpayment issue has been resolved automatically or if you need to take additional steps. Third, if you need to know your overpayment balance, the amount of your refund, whether or not you got a blanket waiver or other specific information about the status of your account, the place to get that information is the department itself. We don't have access to those records. We can, in some cases, request those records if needed to try to get you help. And so you can also contact us, but you should start by trying to contact the department. Fourth, if you don't get a blanket waiver, the individualized waiver process is going to be open until March 3rd of 2027. So that there is time to apply, but I'd encourage you to apply as soon as you can. There's really no good reason not to. If you do, and fifth, if you do apply for an individualized waiver, then you can appeal the denial if it's denied. But that's time sensitive. So that is the one thing that you have to hurry to do. If your individualized waiver is denied because you answered wrong on those 2 questions, then you'll need to appeal within 15 days of receiving your denial notice. So while there's no rush to file your individualized waiver application, there is time pressure to get an appeal filed as soon as possible if it isn't approved.